Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to plunge into complex topics and really pull out the essential insights you need. Today we're heading into a fascinating, maybe surprisingly delicate world, historic drawings. Our mission: to explore the State Hermitage Museum's new graphics gallery and see what its hidden treasures tell us about a truly captivating time in art history.
Exactly. And this deep dive isn't just about looking at masterpieces. It's about understanding an art form that's, well, spent centuries mostly hidden away. It's a chance for you to really connect with, the raw creativity of these artists from way back when.
That sounds brilliant. So this new graphics gallery at the Hermitage, it's on the third floor of the Winter Palace, right?
That's right.
It feels like a really special project. Why aren't graphic works, drawings, engravings, that sort of thing, why aren't they usually out on permanent display? What's the thinking behind a dedicated gallery now?
Well, the basic problem, and this is what makes the gallery so important, is paper. It's just extremely sensitive to light. Light literally destroys paper over time. It fades pigments, weakens the fibers.
Okay.
So these amazing pieces, they simply can't be left out in the open all the time. It means really strict conditions for exhibiting them.
How strict are we talking?
We're talking maybe 3-4 months on display, maximum, and only under very specific low-level controlled lighting.
Right. So it's a serious conservation issue.
Absolutely. And this isn't just the Hermitage, it's standard practice in all the big museums worldwide. The British Museum, the Met in New York, they all do the same thing. So for the Hermitage, creating this graphics gallery, it's really fulfilling a long-held ambition. It's a way to finally show these incredibly vulnerable works, even if it's just for short periods.
So preservation is really king here. It almost sounds like there's this whole hidden layer of art history because of it. Does that mean these hidden pieces, the drawings and prints, are somehow seen as less important than, say, the big paintings or sculptures that are always out? That's a really important point, and no, not at all. It's easy to think that way, I suppose. In most museum departments, yeah, the best stuff, the most famous works, are usually on permanent display. Anything in storage might be, maybe seen as slightly secondary. But graphic art collections, they're completely different. They hold absolute first-class works, genuine masterpieces of the highest level. These pieces have to be kept hidden purely to protect them.
I see.
So the whole point of the graphics gallery is to bring these otherwise unseen treasures out into the light, so to speak, through careful rotation.
Makes sense.
The gallery actually opened back in June 2023. Its first exhibition was sort of a calling card, comparing engravings and drawings, looking at that dialogue between printed graphics and original drawings. But today we're diving into the next exhibition, which features some truly exceptional, rarely seen pieces.
Okay, let's zoom in then. The exhibition focuses on the Old Netherlandish school. Now, for listeners wanting to really get this, what exactly does Old Netherlandish mean in our history terms? Are we talking geography, a time period, or both?
It's definitely both. Geographically, think lower lands, the areas around the lower parts of those big North European rivers, the Rhine, the Scheldt, the Meuse. Historically, that covered today's Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and even bits of northern France.
Okay, got the region and the time period.
That's quite specific, too. It basically runs from when the region was unified politically under the Dukes of Burgundy around 1430, give or take, and it continues right up until the region split dramatically in the 1580s.
What caused the split?
It was driven by religious conflict, Catholics versus Protestants, and the northern provinces wanting independence from the Catholic Spanish kings. So that 150-year window, roughly 1430 to the 1580s, that's precisely what we mean by the Netherlandish school in art history.
150 years. That feels quite compact, historically speaking. How did such a relatively short period leave such a massive mark on European culture?
It is relatively short, yeah, but the impact was incredible. It was just an era of intense flourishing: science, philosophy, music, architecture, and of course the visual arts. I mean, we're talking about artists everyone still knows today, right?
Yeah.
Jan van Eyck, Rogier van der Weyden, Hieronymus Bosch, Peter Bruegel the Elder, just giants.
Absolutely, household names.
And it wasn't just painting. Think about 15th century Brussels tapestries. They were considered the absolute peak, best in the world. They hung in palaces all over Europe, Hampton Court, the Vatican.
Wow.
Then you have illuminated manuscripts, the miniatures on parchment. Netherlandish artists were just masters at that. Goldsmiths' art, sculpture in wood and stone. All incredibly high-level stuff. So, amongst all these dazzling famous art forms, the drawings, which are the focus here, They might seem, well, less known, maybe even less interesting at first glance.
Right.
But as we'll see, they're actually profoundly important.
So that's the paradox, isn't it? If they're so important, why do they feel so much rarer, so much less visible than the paintings or those amazing tapestries from the same time?
It is a bit of a paradox. And the key insight, I think, is that drawings were mostly internal products.
Internal products, what do you mean?
They were part of the artist's creative process, not usually finished works intended for sale or display. Think of them like the artist's private thoughts on paper.
Okay.
They give you this really direct, unvarnished look into how artistic ideas were born, a kind of intimacy you don't always get with the polished final piece.
Right, more raw.
Exactly. And because they were fragile and maybe just seen as working tools, far fewer of them actually survived.
How few are we talking?
Well, get this. For the entire 15th century, so from the 1420s or 30s up to 1500, maybe only about 600 Netherlandish drawings still exist worldwide.
600 total.
Total. That figure comes from a big research project at Vienna University. So every single one that survived, it's almost like an error of probability. They really shouldn't have lasted.
A miracle, basically.
Pretty much. And funnily enough, they're even rarer in the Netherlands itself. Serious collecting started later there, partly because of all the civil unrest and war.
That's incredible scarcity. So if these drawings were mostly internal, never really meant for public record, does that make studying them, attributing them, a real challenge? Sounds like detective work.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge scientific problem, as art historians say. Unlike paintings, which might have commissions, contracts, mentions in archives or wills, drawings were rarely commissioned.
Right.
They weren't usually described anywhere, and artists hardly ever signed them because, well, they were just for their own use.
But lots of anonymous works.
Exactly, a huge number. Which makes figuring out who drew what incredibly difficult. And this brings us back to the Hermitage collection. They have something like 40,000 drawings overall, a massive collection. But their collection of Old Netherlandish drawings, which is now seen as exceptional, over 100 top-quality pieces, that was only really recognized quite recently.
It wasn't just sitting there labeled.
No, it was the result of decades of really dedicated work by the curators. Painstakingly going through albums, anonymous folders, sifting through things piece by piece. They started with maybe 30, 35 drawings that were misattributed or unidentified and built it up from there.
Wow. Decades of searching.
Yes. And this deep dive, it's really showcasing the absolute best of that newly assembled, hard-won collection.
That is quite a story. And it puts the Hermitage in a really significant position, doesn't it? Holding 12 15th century Netherlandish drawings. That makes them one of the biggest collections outside the traditional Great Four, the Louvre, British Museum, Albertina in Vienna, and the Berlin Kupferstich cabinet.
It really does. It's a testament to that long-term effort.
Can we look at some specific examples? What treasures have emerged?
Absolutely. Let's start with one, a portrait of a youth. It's now attributed to Petrus Christus. Now, the first thing you might notice is that the drawing itself is, well, it's been distorted. Someone, probably centuries ago, barbarically cut around the figure's outline. Yeah, and then pasted onto another sheet of paper. But even with that damage, its artistic quality just shines through. You cannot diminish its artistic value, as they say.
And why is this one so special?
Its rarity is just incredible. Think about it. For Jan van Eyck, we have one reliable drawing. For Rogier van der Weyden, one. And for Petrus Christus, who was a major painter, we have maybe 20, 22 paintings by him before this discovery. There were no known drawings securely attributed to him.
None at all.
None. This Hermitage drawing is one of maybe 4 now tentatively linked to him, so it's hugely significant.
How did they figure out it was by him? Especially if it was misattributed before.
Right. It was originally thought to be Italian school, but the breakthrough came from comparing it closely with Christus's painted portraits. You see a very similar way of handling the face, the structure, even, interestingly, similar slight errors, like the eyes being just a fraction unfocused.
Rarers.
Well, errors might be the wrong word. It's a kind of characteristic that actually gives his portraits this unique, almost teasing vitality.
I see.
And this visual comparison was backed up by technical analysis, too. Infrared photography of the underdrawings in his paintings showed similar line work.
Fascinating detective work again. What's another highlight?
Okay, another really exceptional piece is a study of an older man. This one comes from the circle of Rogier van der Weyden. It's just a drawing of incredibly high artistic quality. You can really feel van der Weyden's great, very influential style in it. It has this amazing combination of what the curators call stony stillness, but also real sculptural bulk. And the expression is almost ecstatic. It's very powerful.
It sounds captivating. And you mentioned earlier these artists often used a specific technique, silverpoint.
Mm.
That sounds quite different from drawing today.
Yeah.
Tell us more about what that actually is.
Yeah, silverpoint. It's really quite magical, and it was a favorite technique for these early Netherlandish masters. Imagine, basically, a stylus, a stick, with a sharp tip made of silver. When you draw with it on a surface, it leaves a very fine, quite faint grayish line. It's the trace of the metal itself. You could even try it carefully with a silver spoon handle on some paper. You'll see a faint mark.
Huh. So not like a pencil with graphite.
Not at all. The modern graphite pencil, that was a much later invention, late 18th century, quite high-tech in comparison. And here's the really crucial part about silverpoint. It wouldn't work on just any paper. The artists had to specially prepare the surface.
I'm prepared, yeah.
They'd ground the paper, usually coating it with a thin layer of often powdered bone mixed with glue. Then they'd smooth it meticulously. This created a slightly abrasive surface that the silverpoint could actually leave a clear mark on. It was a very deliberate, craft-intensive process.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of effort before you even start drawing.
It was, and drawing with it was incredibly challenging too.
How so?
Well, first, you absolutely cannot erase it. Once a line is down, it's down.
No room for error.
None. And second, you can't really vary the line's thickness or darkness much, not like with a pencil or charcoal. So to build up shapes, volume, shadows, artists had used lots and lots of fine lines, hatching and cross-hatching, very densely or sparsely packed.
So why on earth did artists like Van Eyck and van der Weyden choose it, if it was so difficult?
Because of its unique aesthetic qualities, its particular magic, there's a very subtle, almost shimmering quality to the silver line. It tarnishes slightly over time, changing color. It doesn't reproduce well in photos, sadly. The images tend to be very detailed, almost miniaturist. You really need to see them up close, maybe even with a magnifying glass.
Really?
Oh, yes. Then you discover this whole cosmos of fine strokes capturing incredible details like tiny veins pulsing on a temple. It's like these drawings exist in a kind of parallel reality created with this bewitching scrupulousness. It's utterly captivating when you see the real thing.
Incredible. That makes me want to look at them very closely.
You should. And there's another fascinating discovery related to that head of an older man drawing, the one from van der Weyden's circle.
Go on.
It turns out that drawing matches, millimeter for millimeter, a figure in a fragment of a lost altarpiece known to be by van der Weyden himself, specifically the head of St. Joseph, in a painting now in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon.
Millimeter for millimeter. So it wasn't a sketch for the painting.
Exactly. It suggests this drawing wasn't a preparatory sketch, but what art historians call a pattern or a model drawing.
A pattern.
Yeah, basically an exact copy of an existing successful image kept in the workshop.
Why would they keep copies like that?
Well, a couple of reasons. Firstly, to maintain consistency. If you had a popular depiction of a saint, like St. Joseph, you'd want him to look recognizable in different commissions. The pattern ensures that consistency in facial type.
Makes sense for branding, almost.
Sort of, yeah. And secondly, for the workshop assistants. If the master had a successful composition, apprentices could use these patterns to help create replicas or variations for sale.
Practical workshop tools, then.
Precisely. And there's another example of a pattern drawing in the exhibition, this one by a follower of van der Weyden called The Master of the Legend of St. Catherine. It shows it was a common practice.
It's just amazing to think about these delicate sheets of paper surviving all this time, through wars, fires, neglect, and the stories they carry about how art was actually made.
It really is awe-inspiring. You know, to truly appreciate them, try to imagine that very same piece of paper you're looking at. It was held in the hands of an artist in Bruges or Ghent, maybe in the 1450s. It's traveled through more than 500 years to reach us.
That's a powerful thought, a direct physical link back half a millennium.
Indeed, it's a testament to survival against all odds.
Well, we've only just begun to explore these incredible 15th century Netherlandish drawings. There's clearly so much more to see and understand. Join us next time as we continue this deep dive, looking at more masterpieces from this amazing collection in this pivotal era. Definitely stay curious.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into sources, research, articles, notes, and pull out the key insights, sometimes finding some pretty surprising stuff along the way. Today, we're jumping into the really fascinating world of 15th century Netherlandish drawings. We're focusing on a collection from the State Hermitage Museum, and our mission really is to see how these drawings, which might look simple at first glance, actually open up this hidden world, a world of, artistic communication, innovation, even historical records. And it challenges how we often think about art today. So let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. When you think about art today, a copy often feels like, well, less important, doesn't it? Sort of secondary, maybe not original, perhaps even a bit unnecessary. But for the 15th century, that whole modern idea is, well, it's just wrong. Why is that?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, you really have to shift your perspective. Think about the kind of visual vacuum artists were working in back then. There were no photos, obviously, no easy way to reproduce images. And travel, it was difficult, expensive, time-consuming. An artist might see things in their local church or their master's workshop, sure. But once they finished a big commission, say an altarpiece, and it was shipped off somewhere else, they might literally never see their own finished work again. So in that context, sketching things they saw, things that caught their eye, maybe for later use, and also, crucially, drawing their own compositions before they left the workshop. It wasn't just, practice. It was a professional norm. It was an absolute need. It's how they built up their visual library, their stock of ideas.
Right, so these weren't just like homework assignments for students. These were working tools for professionals. I mean, before reproductive engraving really took off later in the century, what role did these drawings play? Were they just for the artist's own reference in the studio? Oh, much bigger than that. Drawings were really the only way to communicate complex artistic ideas over any distance. They're quick to make, light, easy to transport. You could send them between cities, even countries. You could almost say drawings were like the circulatory system for art at the time. They kept ideas flowing, moving, evolving.
Wow, the circulatory system. I like that. And it's fascinating how artists copied, isn't it? They were selective. They picked what mattered to them. We've got two great examples here, copies after Rogier van der Weyden. What do we see happening in these particular drawings?
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is often the copyist isn't that interested in the big story or the expressions on the faces or even the emotional drama. Instead, you see them really zeroing in on things like drapery, the folds of fabric. And the reason is, well, compositional structures like a crucifixion scene, they were often quite standardized. But how you actually rendered the fabric, how it fell, how it folded over a figure that was seen as a purely authorial element. It was like the artist's signature. And Rogier van der Weyden, who they're copying here, he was an absolute master of this. His contemporaries were fascinated by how he did it, trying to kind of reverse engineer his technique through these drawings.
That's amazing, like trying to crack the code of his style. So in that first copy after Van der Weyden, the one with figures from his Crucifixion with Mourners, the copyists actually moved the figures around on the page, didn't they? It seems like they were more interested in Van der Weyden's sort of formal achievements, how he drew the forms, than just retelling the story exactly.
Exactly. They're isolating the bits they want to study. And the second copy after Rogier van der Weyden is maybe even more valuable because it preserves a painting that's now lost. We only know what it looked like because of copies like this one. And there's another similar one in Stockholm, actually. It shows the Madonna and Child with St. John the Evangelist. And the baby Jesus is writing in a book, which is thought to relate to the idea that John's gospel was divinely inspired, the closest to Christ's own word.
And beyond just telling us about a lost painting, the drawing itself is technically incredible. That pen work, it's so controlled, so ordered, but also really lively. The hatching, if you look really close, it's like just a little fragment of those folds. It almost looks like, I don't know, a 20th century constructivist piece or some kind of geometric abstraction. It's just pure form. Shows incredible skill, even in a copy.
Definitely. And since we're on pen drawing, maybe it's worth diving into the practical side for a moment. Pens were just always there. Artists use them for writing anyway.
Yeah.
And unlike something like silverpoint, you didn't need specially prepared paper. So you could just grab a pen and start drawing very spontaneously.
Right. Not like today with our ballpoints and fine liners. These were actual feathers, yeah. Goose feathers, swan feathers.
Exactly. Goose or swan quills were common. Maybe even tiny chicken feathers if you needed really fine lines. They had to cut and maintain these quills themselves, too.
And the inks. We see a lot of browns in these drawings. What were they using?
Mostly something called bistre. It sounds fancy, but it's basically soot ink, made from chimney soot. And the color, the shade of brown, would actually change depending on where in the chimney the soot came from, what kind of wood was being burned. So you get this whole range from yellowish brown to almost black, all within the brown family. If you see true black ink, that was usually lamp black, soot collected from oil lamps. But yeah, these soot-based inks, bistre and lamp black, they were the mainstays, the core sort of graphic arsenal for artists then.
Wow, mixing your own inks from chimney soot.
It really puts the craft back in artist's craft, doesn't it? Okay, so speaking of copies that tell a story, there's another one here that's just packed with history. And politics, too. It's this complex prayer scene. What are we looking at? Right, this one is fascinating. You see all these figures representing different social classes from across Europe, all kneeling before this high altar. And on the altar itself, there's incredible detail. A statue of Christ, below that a scene of the Last Supper, and even further down, these Old Testament scenes like Abraham and Melchizedek, Elijah getting bread in the desert, very layered. But the key thing is, this isn't just a religious scene. It has this complex plot. Religious doctrine, yes, but with a really strong political undercurrent. Because among the worshippers, you can identify actual historical figures. There's Emperor Charlemagne, Charles the Great, seen as a patron saint. And next to him, Emperor Frederick III and his son, Maximilian, who was actually ruling the Netherlands when this was likely made. And maybe the most notable figure, or poignant, is Maria of Burgundy, kneeling there among the clergy. Poignant because, well, she was already dead when this was done, died very young, only 25, after falling from her horse.
Wow. So she's depicted there even though she'd passed away. What does that signify? It sounds like there's a lot more going on than just prayer here.
Absolutely. Her presence was incredibly important for Maximilian, her husband. It was their marriage that brought the Netherlands under Habsburg rule. Her inclusion here helps legitimize his power, his connection to the region. So this drawing is actually a record of another lost painting. One commissioned for a church in Bruges, apparently by the city council and Maximilian together. It was meant as a sign of reconciliation after a really long, difficult conflict between the city and Maximilian. So it's a political statement wrapped in religious imagery. And technically, the drawing itself is amazing. Look at the hatching, that parallel and cross-hatching. It's so ordered, so intricate, wonderfully complex. It really points towards that sort of calligraphic drawing style that becomes big in the 16th century, where the line work itself is almost like beautiful writing.
Incredible. A peace treaty in picture form, almost. So we've seen how copies were this vital communication network, but what about the originals, those first sparks, the artist's own initial thoughts on paper? The Hermitage has some amazing examples, these author sketches or project drawings, but how can experts even tell these apart from all the copies, especially when compositions were often reused?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge sometimes. But it often comes down to recognizing the artist's handwriting, so to speak. Just like you can recognize a friend's handwriting, an expert looking closely can often see a consistent style, a particular way of making lines, a certain rhythm, a way of building forms across a group of drawings. It's about identifying that unique hand. In these 4 sheets at the Hermitage, you can really see that consistency. Now, these specific drawings have an interesting backstory. For a long time, maybe a century, they were thought to be by a follower of Rogier van der Weyden, an artist named Ranke van der Stock. But scholars now pretty much agree that's wrong. The current thinking connects them directly to Rogier van der Weyden's workshop. They're part of a bigger group, about 28 drawings known worldwide, that all seem related stylistically. And one theory, something I've actually published on, is that maybe these weren't even projects for paintings. Maybe they were designs for sculptural things, like carved wooden altarpieces.
A design for sculpture, not painting. That's really interesting. You can kind of see that in the Annunciation scene, maybe. It's believed to be a sketch for a carved group that ended up in a church in Laredo, Spain, back around 1440. But here's where it gets really interesting. There's another drawing in this group. It shows wood carvers in their workshop.
Yes. And this one is just exceptionally valuable. Why? Because it's a domestic scene, a genre scene, which is incredibly rare for this period. Almost everything is religious. This is thought to be the only known depiction of a 15th century woodcarver's or sculptor's workshop. Think about that. It gives us this amazing window into their world, the tools, the benches, what they wore, their shoes, their hats. It's incredible anthropological ethnographic detail, a real historical document. And beside that, it's just drawn with such mastery and grace. But look at its shape. It's kind of complex, irregular, sort of converges like a cone or a ship's keel. That shape is the clue.
Right, that odd shape. So this is the aha moment. What was it actually for?
It's a project drawing for a misericord.
Ah, okay. For people who don't know, what's a misericord?
It's that little ledge, often carved, on the underside of the folding seats in choir stalls in big churches.
Right. So when the monks or clergy had to stand for hours during long services, they could flip the seat up and sort of lean against this little shelf. It offered a bit of mercy or rest, hence the name.
Exactly. And designs for these, especially drawn ones like this, incredibly rare. There are maybe only 3 or 4 others known in the entire world. So yeah, this workshop scene is a pretty special piece.
Just amazing. A tiny drawing for a hidden ledge gives us the only view of a 15th century sculptor's studio.
And these drawings carry their history on them too. You often see little marks, stamps, or annotations. They tell you where the drawing has been, who owned it. It's like provenance clues.
Yeah, you can spot some on these drawings we've discussed. There's often a double red line. What does that tell us?
That mark, the double red line, it points to an anonymous French collection from the 18th century.
Wow.
We don't know exactly who, but it places it in that context.
And the other mark, a crowned P, looks like a Cyrillic letter P.
Right. That's the stamp of Emperor Paul I of Russia. It was put on works in Catherine the Great's collection during an inventory right after she died in 1797. So when you see that crowned P, you know the drawing belonged to Catherine the Great herself, which is pretty amazing provenance.
Okay, so we've journeyed through copies, originals, tools, politics. Finally, we get to Hieronymus Bosch. Now, technically, he's bridging the 15th and 16th centuries, but he's often seen as the endpoint of this Netherlandish tradition. He's got this huge cult status today, doesn't he? People see links to expressionism, surrealism. Like, he was way ahead of his time. What was different about how he drew?
Bosch was definitely doing something different. His drawings feel much more like a very quick, informal way of getting ideas down. There's a kind of summary manner to them. The lines can seem almost careless, maybe hasty, compared to the meticulousness we saw earlier. It really was a completely new word in drawing at that time, a real shift.
And the Bosch drawing we're talking about here from the exhibition is particularly interesting because, well, it's not actually by Bosch, is it? It's a copy, but a very accurate contemporary copy of a Bosch drawing that's now lost, which paradoxically makes it incredibly valuable what's in this copy.
Oh, it's pure Bosch. Just packed with these fascinating, strange, often frightening images. Classic Boskian nightmare fuel. You've got an armless dwarf stomping in heavy metal shoes, a ship's mast that seems to be growing out of someone's head, demons tormenting sinners inside the fiery ship. There's a gallows, a giant arrow piercing something, huge eyeglasses maybe symbolizing blindness or folly perched on a structure, even weapons like swords and knives seemingly coming alive and attacking people. Pure hellscape images. And what makes this copy especially important is that some of the details and specific motifs in it, they're actually unknown from any other versions or related works by Bosch or his circle. So this copy is unique witness. It preserves elements of a lost Bosch invention that we wouldn't know otherwise. It was likely made by a student or someone right there in Bosch's workshop. And in the context of the Hermitage collection, it really serves as this kind of intermediate point, bridging that gap between the 15th century style and the new approaches of the 16th century.
What a journey. We've gone from copies being essential communication tools to peering into workshops, uncovering lost paintings and political plots, right up to the edge of Bosch's wild imagination. It really changes how you look at these old drawings.
It absolutely does. And thinking about all this, the copies, the originals, the lost works, it really raises an important question for us today.
Yeah, what does this all mean for you listening now? Maybe it's a reminder that value isn't always about what we call original or perfect today. Sometimes the real value lies in the purpose something served, the ingenuity behind it, the way it communicated ideas in its time. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What things in our world today, things we might see as secondary or just copies, might actually be the most valuable keys for understanding our own time, or maybe even for recovering knowledge that could get lost in the future? Something to think about.